There we go.
That.
Hey,
Here
Fish.
we are. How
It's
are you, sir?
good. It's been a year and we're back. We got Fables.
I know it's been 11 months since the last time we did it. We did the last one in March, I think. Like actually the second Wednesday. I mean, we've done a few since, which has been fun. We did the one at Scott Farm during the summer, and that was great. We've done a couple of recorded stories, which have been fun. But it feels really good to kind of be back here again.
hmm
So
So why don't you set us up for what we're going to see tonight?
well, first of all, everybody, welcome. We're so glad to have this kind of back in, and that guy that's sharing the screen with me right now is got a lot to do with the reason that we're all gathering here on the second Wednesday of the month. So, big round of applause for Keith Marks, and thank you for making all this happen, man. Finding this new platform, it's really cool. The nice thing about this is we've been able to sort of reach outside that local network and find some people that have been, that would be too much of a travel for them to come to Fable shoulder to shoulder. So we'll be looking forward to adding some interesting folks in the months to come. And I imagine, like everything else, cast, crew, and audience members alike, this is really the first pants optional Fables, so that's a nice thing. We've been working hard to try to keep this whole thing going throughout the entire pandemic, and that's really good. We we figured out when Keith said to me, he said, "Hey, do you think that we can present this thing online and try to create that benchmark again for the second Wednesday of the month?" I immediately thought yes, and the first one that we should do should be lighthearted because it's been such a tough year, right? It's been such a tough stretch. So I literally thought of and invited the funniest people I know and David Heiler. I invited him as well. So he'll have his shot later on at me. But full disclosure, as schedules uh, got a little sullied as we moved on, we weren't able to present all of our storytellers live, which is something that we'll strive for. But we didn't want to miss some of the stories. So our first story presenter tonight is a young lady named Adrienne Vivenzio, who I met probably a little over a decade ago, and I've been trying to get her to do it, but she has kind of run the gamut of everything. She's a bartender. She does cosmetic tattoos, which is an interesting thing. She's also a stand-up comedian, which is one of the reasons why I thought when we were doing this, she might be a really good choice for a storyteller. So I guess let's cue the video. She couldn't make it because she had to work tonight, and she'll tell you that in the video. So let's just cue it up, and we'll get this first fable started here on February. Thanks
Hi,
everybody for joining.
everybody. My name's Adrienne, and I've known Fish for a couple of years now. Actually, a couple more, like closer to 10 probably. And he's been asking me to do the Fables since they were in person, life BC before COVID. So yeah, he was asking me to do this for a while, but unfortunately I usually work all of the time. And again, I am working when this is happening, but I decided to step out of my comfort zone and try to do this virtual fable, this storytelling. So I'm going to tell you guys a story that explains why I'm still single. So it all started, it was a July day. It was really, really hot that day. And I was living down in Dover by the post office, and I was going to my friend's house, and me and my friend Dan took off and we walked down the road to his house, and we got there and we were all hanging out, having a couple beers, and then ran out of nowhere, this other guy that's there, he says, "Oh, hey guys, on my way in here, I saw this bird. I think it was injured down the road." And we were like, "What do you mean?" And he's like, "It was just like hopping on the side of the road and it didn't move. It was weird." And so I was like, "Oh, well, we got to go figure this out. We got to go save this bird." So me and my friend Dan took off and we walked down the road and we found this bird. So I turned to my friend Dan and I was like, "Take your shirt off." And he was like, "What do you mean take my shirt off?" I'm like, "Take your shirt off. I'm going to throw it over this bird. We got to bring it to some place. We have to do something. It's hurt," because it was just hopping along. It wasn't flying away from us. So he obliged and he took his shirt off and handed it to me, and I threw it over the bird and captured the bird, and I was holding the bird, and we ended up getting it into a shoebox and putting it in the car. And I found this bird rehabilitator who was located right in Newfane named Fred Smith, who I'm not sure if anybody knows him, but fantastic guy. Just like to throw that out there. So we got to his house and we got to, meet his other birds that he had. He had a crow named Paul and there was an owl named Stella, and it was very cool. So I gave him this bird and he pulls it out of the shoebox and he's looking at it and he's like, wow, this is just a beautiful bird. It's actually a northern flicker woodpecker. And then he gives me kind of this funny look and he looks at the bird again and he's moving it around and looking at me out of the side of his eye. And I'm just like, okay, this is strange. Like, what's wrong? And he says, so there's nothing wrong with this bird. And I was like, what do you mean there's nothing wrong with this bird? And he just released the bird, let it go, and it was fine. And looking back, it's really funny because when I was holding the bird in the shirt before we got it in the shoebox, it was like struggling to get out of the shirt. And at the time I was like, oh, it's just struggling because it's hot outside and it can't breathe. So, it poked its little head out and calmed down at that point. So I was just like, oh, it can't breathe in the shirt. That's what's going on. And it poked its little head out and it put its little beak right on my hand. And it was so cute. And, looking back, I'm like, oh, the bird was probably struggling because there was nothing wrong with it and I was kidnapping it. You know what I mean? Like if someone threw a black shirt over my head and shoved me in a box and put me in the trunk of a car, I'd probably freak out too. So, the bird got released, and then the next day I woke up and I had a rash on my hand and I didn't really think anything of it. It kind of just looked a little bit like poison ivy, which I tend to get sometimes. But then I woke up the next day and it was on my other hand and I was like, okay, that's strange. It's spreading like that, and it went up my arm a little bit, and I was like, all right, I should call the doctor. This looks a little different. Like I said, I'd gotten poison ivy so many times before. It was just a little weird. So I called my doctor, and they were like, yeah, okay, just come in, we'll look at it. So I go into the doctor, and they're looking at it, and he's like, this doesn't look like, poison ivy, doesn't look like poison oak. He's like, this doesn't look like any kind of like irritant from a plant. He's like, it kind of just looks like hives. And he's like, well, did you come into contact with anything unusual? And it had been a few days that I just didn't even register that it could have been the bird. So I was just like, no, nothing unusual. And he's like, I really don't know what to say. He's like, just put some like cortisone cream on it and hopefully it'll go away. If you think of anything that you came into contact with, try and avoid it next time. And that's when it hit me. I was like, oh, the bird. I was like, oh, I saved, didn't really save anything. I saved this bird a few days ago, and the part where the hives are the worst are right where the beak was. He stuck his little head out right there, and the doctor was like, all right, well, that's pretty simple then, just avoid that bird, and I was like, oh yeah, that's easy. Like, how often am I going to come into contact with a woodpecker? You know what I mean? Especially just like holding it in my hand like that. And this really explains why I'm single. It's because I'm allergic to peckerheads. Thank you, guys. I hope you all have a great night. I'll hopefully be able to watch the stream after the fact. I'll try and do this again sometime. Thank you.
All right, there's Adrian Vivenzio. Regardless of what the screen says, I am Peter Fish Case. Thank you very much, man behind the scenes, Keith Marks, once again for putting up the banners and getting this all done. Adrian was somebody that I had, again, met roughly about a decade ago. Honestly, she was a contest winner at a radio station that I worked at. I don't know why, of all the contests that I've done over the years, she won an iPod from Brown Computer Solutions and $100 gift certificate, oddly enough, to Turn It Up, now celebrating their 25th anniversary in business. So she was one, and we've just kind of been friends ever since. And then she started doing stand-up comedy, and she's pretty funny. You can find her stuff on YouTube, as well as she works at the 802 Bar, I think, up in Stratton. So if you're looking for a nice cold IPA on a hot winter's night, go up and see Adrian. Coming up next is a guy that is another one that I've often tried to get to the main stage or to the cafe stage in Putney, Vermont at the Next Stage Theater. Joe Heslin. I don't know. Joe is probably in his own right one of the funnier individuals I know. He probably, if it wasn't for his addiction to food and heat, he would probably be a stand-up comedian. Joe's the kind of guy that you never forget your initial meeting with. That's how I would describe him. Meanwhile, not being able to recall my initial meeting with him, but that's more of an age issue than anything else. So tonight, Joe is he's going to tell a story about doing laundry. Well, what's funny about doing laundry? Well, Joe, why don't you tell him?
Well, Bajang, thank you so much, Mr. Peter. I really appreciate that. I don't remember the first time I met you either, but there was the smell. I do remember that. There was that.
It's
sulfur.
kind of with a taste.
Sulfury. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for having me. This is really nice.
Thank you.
I'm supposed to do the talky thing now, I guess, huh? Okay. So, hi everybody. I've never done this before, and it is strange to be able to see myself on a screen while not wearing, pajama pants. But I do have the slippers, which is nice. And in fact, that's kind of funny, isn't it? It's like telling stories is one of those things that it's kind of about empathy, right? We wanna try to bridge these things. So for example, like even though many of you probably don't know me, you can tell something about me. I have amazing taste in curtains, and that plant is not exactly dead. So these things are good. But I do love that right now, like when you see somebody, you kind of just like, there are those times when we have that kind of instant connection where like, I kind of suss out where that person is at in their life. Like you can see that I'm quite chunky and husky. Yeah, so you get a sense of where I'm at in my life, but it's COVID. What do you want from me? But anywho, yeah, it's interesting how like in that moment we can have that kind of like, I see exactly what's happening here. And part of that is like this empathy piece, and empathy is a neat part because it talks about truth. True stories are the funniest parts. That's what's the difference between the kind of joke telling and storytelling, is that in that most compelling way, it tells you a little bit more about life, etc. One of the ways that I think about truth is there's old Occam's razor. I don't know if anybody, you should be. If you haven't, for the love of God, read a book. But Occam's razor is this idea that given the most obvious conclusion, you probably have the most likely solution for why something happened. And I mean, that could be really helpful. I like Occam's razor. It's helpful in the idea of, I think I can try to tell something to somebody, or I can try to understand how something came to be, and what is most obvious is probably the most likely one. And of course, this is proven by every episode of Scooby-Doo, which is incredibly compelling because I think most things in life, I think, are learned through an episode of Scooby-Doo. But wasn't it funny how Shaggy never quite got the full understanding that it was always just going to be some old Scroogey asshole with a mask on. Like, it's like he never quite synced up with that reality. The Scooby snacks and everything. I think he was probably, anywho. But yeah, the razor goes both ways. And here's a quick story about that. My wife and I lived in Richmond, Virginia, and we were there. This was right before we were married, actually. We got married and then we moved to Japan, which is a whole other story. But we were living in Virginia and we weren't making a lot of money. We both had kind of little jobs. And so we would, however, splurge. Like once every couple of weeks, we would go to brunch on Sunday at the Strawberry Street Cafe. And it was this amazing, incredible brunch, like an incredible, like beautiful spread. It was delicious. It was awesome. And what was great was the reason we did it was because there was a laundromat like a block away. And that laundromat was one of the most derelict in the entire city. But because it was close to Strawberry Street Cafe, we'd go. And we'd be incredible gluttons. I'm not going to be afraid to say that I think I did bring some Tupperware containers. Yeah, I know. Shocking, isn't it? Shocking. But anywho, yes, so we'd go to this Strawberry Street Cafe and we would have our food. We'd go to the laundromat, we'd put the laundry in, we'd go gluttonize, eventually sit there. One of us would go over and put it in the dryer. So we'd be there for like 2 hours or something, 2.5 hours. And it was always fantastic and magnificent. And there was this time that my wife, she would go away in the summers. And every summer she would take these kids on trips, these usually incredibly wealthy children, and they would go to Utah and Colorado, and she would take them out into the woods and try to get them lost or something. It was very deliberate. She always brought a banjo with her. No, that's not true. That part's not true, actually. But she would do these great trips, and it was nice because then we would have a month apart, and I would be able to do my own thing and, you know, footloose and fancy free in the big city, which was always great. But of course, when she came home, I needed to usually set aside 2 or 3 days to make sure that I actually did something, cleaning the house in some way. She was going to come home on Sunday, on Sunday evening. And I decided, well, this might be a good time to actually do some of the laundry that I have not done more or less any of for the month that she'd been gone. So I did my favorite thing, packed all that laundry, got it over to the place, and I go into the loneliest, ugliest, most just downtrodden, sad laundromat in the world. And there's this old guy that's kind of always perpetually in the corner. There was one other dude that was in there, and he was kind of on, like, you know, the washer 2, and I was on washer 16 on this row of washers. And I put in my stuff, and I go over, and I just started, you know, eating and drinking as I am wont to do, and had a good time. Was fine. Then it was time to kind of go and get the laundry out. And as I was going to take the laundry, I pulled it out, and I thought, I'm going to just take this and just throw it in the dryer, go back. I was kind of in a rush, but it was at that moment that I thought my mother had once said to me, Joe, this is your mother. She's like, always make sure that you check and see what's in the dryer before you put anything in. Because when you were kids, I used to always have to go to laundromats. And one time I put all of our clothes in there with all your dad's, you know, like military uniforms. And I put it on go, and the dryer did its whole thing. And when I got there to take it out, I realized that there was a crayon in there, and everything was ruined. Wax was terrible. Never do that. So I said, okay, sure. At this moment, I really want to go back to the cafe and eat and drink, but I pulled the stuff out and put it back into the washer, and I just looked into this huge industrial thing, and I kind of got in there, and there's nothing. I'm like, oh, good. And then back in the corner, there was this. It looked like almost like a peach pit, you know, like it was about that big. It was way over in the corner, and it was just kind of right behind one of those big wavy things, the big what do you call them? Tourney things. I think that's the official name, tourney things. And I reach back, and I'm almost afraid to touch it because I think it's a bat. It looks like I'm not sure. And I pull it out, and what comes out is a tiny, slim-waisted purple thong. And I'm there in this laundromat with some weird guy in the corner and some guy who's now he's putting his stuff in the dryer. All this way down there. I'm in the loneliest place in the whole city, and I am sitting there with my entire life in my hands, because what was going to happen? I was going to put my clothes in. I was going to do them. Heidi was going to get home in just a few hours. And then we would be going through the laundry and folding it, and she would find it, because that's the nature of it. And she would be like, what is this? After gone a month, and I would have said to her, honey, I have no idea. And it would have been true. But unfortunately, the razor would have been working against me, wouldn't it have? What is the most obvious is that somebody left something for me to find or for her to find, and I had been unfaithful. It was terrifying. And as I stood there with this thong in my hand and seeing my entire married life and future flashing before my eyes, I was looking at it, and the guy at the end says, she never would have believed you. Like, I mean, I swear to God, he just caught it right then, and he just looked at me and he goes, "She never would have believed you." And I was like, "Yes, this is true." So Occam's razor is a wonderful thing. Doesn't always work, but it's nice that we have stories to connect us in these kind of ways, and hopefully we can get a little touch of empathy from these little stories that we share. Thanks so much.
Joe Heslin and his purple thong.
Well, yes, I've since gotten many for myself, and they're beautiful. They're
sure,
great.
yeah, they're comfortable, they're practical, and
they don't show any lines.
No, nothing. Look at that.
There's nothing there. You go.
See, now, you don't get that when we're standing in an unsocially distant space. You don't get
That's
a real
exactly right.
look of Joe Heslin's butt. That's true.
And and there's a lot more to it actually too. There's I mean, there's all of me. Is that too much?
It's weird that you talk about the things that we get to learn about you, that you are sitting inside, clearly warm, with gloves in your back pocket.
Clearly warm, and yes, I do have the gloves. It's because of this magic. Look at this. I have a fire going right there.
Oh.
So I like to steam it up a little bit.
All right.
Well, thank you very much.
Well, Joe Heslin, thank you very much. We finally wrangled you on. We'll get you maybe live at one point in time. Joe Heslin, everybody, thank you for that. It's so much fun to be able to do this again. It just feels natural. So the next person, and this is where when we started up at the beginning, I said that we were able to kind of reach beyond the boundaries of our town and to get it for those folks who remember being at the Next Stage Theater and coming there. I think the longest person to have ever the person who came from the longest distance, I should say, was a nurse who told a story about a childbirth, and she had driven from Rutland. So that was just the one time. Most everybody that we have are neighbors and people that we know and people that we run into. Hillary Casillas is somebody I've known for 15, 16 years. I met her back when I was the chair of the Windham County Relay for Life for the American Cancer Society. She's still there. She's still doing really good work. Her territory had just recently expanded, which put her into a conflict for this evening. And I said, that's it, though. I've got to hear this story. So we're going to do this. So Hillary and I were able to jump on a Zoom call, I think on Monday afternoon, and we recorded Hillary's story, which is all about setting goals and achieving those goals, but in a sophomoric way. So I guess we'll cut to Hillary right now and hear her story about a scoreboard. We're being joined by Hillary Casillas, and she is, what's your official title now with the American Cancer Society?
So my current title is Associate Director of Events, and I have staff in Vermont, Western Mass, and Rhode Island.
So we have a story today about a scoreboard.
Yes, we do.
All right.
And it's really about making your dreams come true. So in 2011, I found my dream. So we live in Moncton, Vermont, which is a tiny town of 1,700 people in the foothills of the Green Mountains. And because it's a tiny town, we've got a really quaint little elementary school where my son was a student, and I think he was in 5th grade at the time. And when I say it's a quaint school, I mean it is the kind of school where the cafeteria, the theater, and the gym are all held in one space. So my son decided he was going to play basketball. And in order to play basketball, you had to hustle out to the school, clear off all of the cafeteria tables, shove them against one wall. And then there were basketball hoops on either side of this really low ceilinged room. And there was also this weird stage tucked on one side where all of the parents would be crammed while we're watching our kids play basketball. And the opposite wall from the stage was a scoreboard. So I have a very limited attention span. I'm not interested in sports. I don't like being claustrophobic. And all of the parents and spectators were crammed on this tiny little stage, and we're watching our kids play basketball. And there was always like a giant kid on the opposing team, and our kids were tiny and they were all terrible at basketball. The room smelled like goulash because it was the school cafeteria. Their uniforms, it was like we had to share them so they were never washed. So it smelled like BO. It was just like the worst nightmare. And I couldn't even play on my phone because there's no self-service in the school. So after like 3 games, I just thought, what am I gonna do? And then I looked up and I saw a scoreboard and I said, oh my God, I have a dream. And on the way home, I told my husband, who is a federal law enforcement officer and like not into my shenanigans. I said, it is my dream to put a mildly obscene word on this scoreboard during a game. And he looked at me and said, that is the worst thing. That's not funny. These are children. That might even be illegal. So I just immediately stopped listening to him and I started texting people because I know the Mr. Rogers quote, like, look for the helpers. There are always helpers. So I started texting people, and the ones that didn't respond have been dead to me since that day. But the ones who did respond and said, yes, we can do this. We can put a mildly obscene word on a scoreboard. I realized that those were my people. So for the next 3 or 4 basketball games, I just did surveillance. I looked around and tried to figure out who operates the scoreboard? How is that person selected? How easily can I manipulate this person into doing something that I want them to do? And then there was one time where I even thought maybe I will learn how to score basketball and I'll operate the scoreboard as a volunteer. And then I realized like that I was never going to put in that kind of time. And when this finally happened, I needed to be nowhere near the scoreboard so I would have plausible deniability. So the last game of the season came along and I was excited because there was a 6th grade girl who was operating the scoreboard. And her dad was the volunteer who ran the rec department in our little town. And he is just a no nonsense guy. So I realized if he was anywhere around, it wasn't going to happen. But he wasn't there. So I sidled up to this girl. I said, hi, I'm Quinn's mom. My husband's one of the coaches. He asked if you could put the time on the board. I think he said it's like 80 minutes and 8 seconds. And her fingers were hovering over the scoreboard. And then she said, that's not right. And so I was like, I panicked. I bolted, disappeared into the crowd, the end. But because that was the last season or last game of the season, I just thought, what are we going to do? I got to wait another year. And then my son said, I want to play baseball. So I cheered because I had been to our rec field and I knew there was a scoreboard. My husband knew I wasn't excited because Quinn wants to play baseball. He knew I was excited because there was a scoreboard. So he said, settle down. That scoreboard hasn't worked in years. I don't even think there's power at the field. But of course, I ignored him, went to the first baseball game of the season, and some good Samaritan had fixed the scoreboard. So I was like, yeah, we are on. This is happening. So I got to know some of the other baseball parents, shared my dream with them. They all thought it was hilarious. So we had a loose plan. And one of the things about our Little League organization was we had coaches, but there was never a dedicated umpire. We were always scrambling at the last minute, like who's going to be the ump? Who's going to do the scoreboard? So I realized that that's where my opportunity was. So at one of the very last games of the season, they were scrambling for a scoreboard operator. And one of the dads, who I didn't know very well, raised his hand. And my heart sank a little bit because like this guy is ex-military. He like just very serious. And I thought, oh God, he is not going to go for my nonsense. But I had become friends with his ex-wife and I asked her if she thought he would do it. And she laughed and said, of course. So we went and conferred with him and we came up with a plan. And the timing was key because it had to be dark enough where you could see the scoreboard, but not so dark that they called the game because we don't have any lights on our field. So, the three of us had a plan. We came up with some hand signals, and when it was time, we executed. Scoreboard was lit up, which is something that you can share at this point. And, all of us started laughing. All the spectators are laughing. Our kids in the dugout figured out what was happening. They were laughing. The opposing team was laughing. And one of our coaches had brought his elderly father to the game, and he was not laughing. So he was looking at the scoreboard, trying to figure out what is going on. And so he walked over to the dugout to get his son's attention, his son, the coach. And so I gave the sign to the scoreboard operator, and poof, the word boob disappeared to live on only in my dreams and this one really horrible Bigfoot quality photograph. So, this has been years ago, but it truly is something that all of us laugh about in Moncton because it was a community effort and it's just so darn funny. So as Peter shared at the beginning, I work for the American Cancer Society, and I joined the organization 17 years ago because my grandmother lost her battle with breast cancer. So breast cancer has a strong genetic link, and I'm really dedicated about making sure I have mammograms. So the day that all of this went down, I had a lumpectomy because I had found a breast lump during my screening that year. And it's not a big deal. It's outpatient. They give you a local anesthetic. But it was kind of ouchy. And I was nervous, like, oh my God, what if I have breast cancer? So on my way home, I really wanted to blow off the baseball game. I wanted to lie on the couch with an ice pack, maybe a glass of wine. But there was something in me that just knew my son would be so disappointed if I blew off his game. So I went to the field, and then all of this happened. So for me, it's a ridiculous sign, but it just felt like a sign that like everything's going to be okay. So my closing message to all of you is don't be afraid to dream. Keep up with your cancer screenings. And every time you see a scoreboard, figure out how you can put the word boob on it.
There she is, Hillary Casillas, who's honestly, she's a very funny lady, and I've always enjoyed listening to her stories and her jokes. I follow her on social media where she's just constantly, she is as big a dog nut as I am. So there is many pictures of her and her dog in various poses, and very funny. As I was listening to Hillary's story when we originally recorded it and discussed it, I thought back to a college game that a friend of mine, a friend named Rocco, had attended, and he really had no true concept of sports ball, if you will. He just figured, he knew that the person with the most points on the board at the end of the day wins, and that was it. But being a guy named Rocco, if you want your team to win, if you're rooting for one team, there's an easy way around it. So he literally went into the scorekeeper's booth and pulled out a $20 bill and said, give the other team always one more point than the other team has. And when the scorekeeper refused to do it, the look on his face was like, why? I don't understand. My money's no good to you. It's not good. It's got to be good. I mean, it's $20. It's 1983. He didn't say that, but it was 1983. So my money this is a lot of money. He didn't understand it. So I understand the idea of trying to manipulate a scoreboard. Our next storyteller, I have known David Heiler for a long time now. David is one of the proprietors of the Whetstone Station. He's one of the proprietors for Campfire's Campground, Heiler Hospitality, brews his own beer. He's an entrepreneur. Everything that this guy does is just fun. So when I asked him to tell a story, I was like, "Come on, man, tell a story." He's like, he goes, "Well, what's it got to be about?" I said, "It just has to be funny." He goes, "I'm not a funny guy," and I said, "But you work at a restaurant. A million funny things a day happen at a restaurant." And of course, with that in mind, he thought it would be funny, a funnier story to talk about how he lost his leg to cancer. So here's David Heiler coming in with, as you can see, his 3 carbon fiber legs displayed, and he's a big fan of the amputee jokes.
Yeah, I gotta say, I'm sorry, I missed this. When you said funny bone, I swear to God, you said missing bone. And so this is going to be wildly off topic. So I apologize in advance. I mean, I'm willing to plow on through, but yeah, I didn't quite get that message. But
well, now they see where you live, so you have to go, Dave. Yeah, you gotta go. All right.
All right. Well, I'm David, and I'm a runner, or at least that's how I'd like to see myself. I have run 4 marathons over the past 10 years, a couple in Boston, a bunch of half marathons, countless 5Ks. I run for health. I mean, I do own a brewery and a burger joint. Joe is a regular. Thank you, Joe. But I run for solace, and I run for solitude, and I run for, mindset. I run for therapy. I'm that guy that when you're on Route 30 and you're driving down the road and like it's pouring rain or sleet or hail and your windshield wipers are going full blast and you see that guy on the side of the road and he's plowing through, he's wearing shorts, he's got like ice building up on his legs and you're like, man, what an idiot. I'm that guy. I can't help it. I look at that guy and say, what an idiot. It's crazy, but once it's in you, you got to do it. So last January, I lost my leg to a rare cancer in my knee. It all started when I was up in Burlington, and I finished a race, and I looked down at my leg, and I had this half a golf ball lodged in the side of my leg, and I hadn't been around any golf courses recently, so I was kind of like, that's weird. So when I came back to Brattleboro, I went to my orthopedist, and I was like, check it out, half a golf ball. And she said, yeah, that's synovial chondromatosis. It's like when cartilage breaks off and it forms these hard calcified bone matter in your leg. It's benign. If it, turns blue, gets bigger, starts to hurt, come back and see us. We'll take care of it. So a couple of years go by and, it's like my secret weapon. I got extra bone, man. And a couple of years go by and I start to develop this like softer tissue on the side and back of my leg. It's like if you cut Stretch Armstrong in half and stuck him on your leg. And, I'm like, yeah, it's getting a little weird. So I go back to her and I said, what's this all about? She said, well, probably it's related. But, again, if it starts to hurt, grows bigger, turns blue, let us know and we'll take care of it. So a few months go by and I'm thinking, after I've tailored 2 pairs of pants because I can't get them over this grapefruit that is now my knee, I got to go check it out. So I go back to her and she said, how do you even walk with that thing? And sends me down to, she recommends me, I go down to an oncologist in Mass General. And I was like, oncologist? She goes, yeah, but it's not cancer. So why are you sending me to an oncologist if it's not cancer? She's like, well, if it is cancer, you'll be in good hands. So I'm like, all right. So I go down to Mass General and I see Dr. Raskin and he takes, a look at it, they check it out. And he's like, so it's cancer. And I was like, yeah, I kind of figured. And he goes, now you have one of the most difficult decisions of your life. We could try to save the leg by, getting in there, scraping things, taking the kneecap out, cutting all the tendons and trying to put it all back together. You're gonna have to go through chemo, you're gonna have to go through radiation, you're gonna have to have multiple operations. And what you're gonna end up with basically is a hairy tube with a foot on the end. Pretty sexy, I know. He said, the other option is you can be the poster child champion of amputees everywhere. You can have a prosthetic that is going to help you to run, bike, hike, swim, hunt, fish. This leg can take you to football games. It'll make you breakfast. It'll recommend great podcasts. It's going to be the greatest thing that you ever had in your life. Needless to say, I went with option 2 due to the hard sell. But as we well know, things don't always work out quite that rosily. And I have to learn to laugh at myself. We all do. You have to be able to look at yourself and say, this is going to be a long road to recovery. And if I can't make jokes about it, I'm not going to make it. couple of jokes. All right. So what do they call amputee karate? Martial arts. What do they call an amputee's favorite toys? Legos. Tough crowd. Even my doctor got into this a little bit. And when I was in pre-op, I had to be catheterized, and not that kind of catheterized, but in my back, because that ends up being a nerve blocker, and so that they can perform the operation without your entire body completely freaking out, which it is anyway. But when I woke up in the recovery room, all my friends and family are there, and they're like, yeah, took a little bit longer than we thought, and they did have to catheterize you in the front. So, of course, I'm horrified, and my doctor comes in, and he's like, and I said, how'd it go? And he said, well, minor glitch getting the catheters in and all, but And I said, really, what was the problem? And he said, well, not much to work with there. Yeah, tough bedside manner. One of the things they ask amputees about the most is phantom pains. Phantom pains are that thing that you feel even though your leg's not there. And they started for me even in the hospital. But, they weren't that bad. So I can remember feeling like a fly landing on my knee, and I'd be like, whoa, there's a fly on me. I don't have a knee. That's crazy. And I can remember feeling like, I had a foot cramp, and I'm like, but I don't have a foot. I remember one in particular where I had like a drop of maple syrup, dripped on my knee and slowly traveled down the front of my shin. I was like, it's so weird. And then the drugs wore off. And that drop of maple syrup felt like a hot serrated knife peeling back my shin skin. Those flies felt like little knives jabbing into my calf. I remember feeling like a burning ember in my foot. Good times, good times. More drugs, please. But my doctors are great. I love those guys. They did a fantastic job. If you're ever down in Mass General in Boston, you need something lopped off. Besides a twisted sense of humor, those guys are the best. So it's been a year. I lost a leg, but I gained 3. So I look at it as net gain 2 legs, no knee operations. I have to say that one of the greatest things is my friends and family have been so supportive this entire time. I cannot thank anybody enough for what they've been. The community's been fantastic. But I have to say that my wife, Allison, has been the most amazing person to me of all. She has supported me from before day one and continues to do so now. And she still, no matter how many legs I have, never forgets to remind me to take out the trash. So thank you to Allison. Thank you to everybody for all the support you've given me over this time. And to my runner friends out there, look for me out on that race course this coming summer. I'll be that guy with one leg blazing past you. And yes, I'm coming for you, fish. Thanks very much.
All right, man. David, thank you. I do have to say that that David and I have shared a few running courses from time to time, and he was fast. He's not a guy I would seek out normally to go run with, and I'm watching his progress. I was hoping that he was just gonna be an easy target for me to finally beat him in a road race, but I'm not even sure that that's there. When I talked to David the other day, there is a mentality within a runner or an endurance athlete that just doesn't have that quit switch, and definitely recognize that in David Heiler and his ability to laugh at himself through this entire thing. The amputee jokes, I learned about David's issue about 2 months to 6 weeks before he actually had the operation. And I learned about it by David's going to be taking some extended time off. And of course they were keeping it. And then David told me, and I was shocked. And then he's like, "Oh, well, don't be. Do you know what an amputee's favorite toy is?" Like right out of the gate. That was the first joke. It was like still fresh, and he was still able to laugh at himself. And I think that it is so true. And I have a sister that is developmentally delayed, and And so there are jokes that I feel like I can make in those situations because I have to live it. And David is allowed to make an amputee joke because he has to live it. So David, thanks for coming on and sharing your story, man. It's tremendous.
My pleasure. Yeah, thanks for having me.
And do you have a YouTube channel? We'll follow you. He's been snowboarding. I've watched him running this summer, and I promise you, we'll go out for a run. But if you beat me, I'm going to take your other leg.
Appreciate it.
All right, David. Thank you so much. All right. So there it is, man. There's another Fables in the book without the intermission. So hopefully you've been sitting at home and drinking your own cold beer and eating your own warm food. We thank you. We're going to do this again next month, the second Wednesday. You up for it again, Keith?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
All right. So from my broadcast closet, completely soundproof, I'll give you a quick little tour of what I'm looking at. There it is. I noticed Steve West is on the as part of the members of the audience. He recognizes the room we're in. This is our podcast booth for the Ear Spoon, so which has been kind of empty and vacant, just me. But thanks everybody. We'll see you the second Wednesday of next month. We're working on a few themes for it, and as soon as I get a few more answers, we'll commit and we'll get it out to you. So thanks so much. And Keith, again, thanks so much for your dedicated time to Fables and putting this whole platform together. I can't thank you enough.
Fish, this wouldn't be possible without you. So a big round of applause for you shouldering through and said, let's go virtual, and putting together a great lineup. And we're happy to keep going, keep Fables alive and do it virtually. So my hat's off to you, friend. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Everybody have a good and safe night.